Welcome to Leader U by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know and trust. Today's sponsors are Radon Professionals. Hello and welcome to the Leader U podcast. Today I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend and just a great human being, Kevin Bailey from the Idaho Nonprofit Center. He joined the Idaho Nonprofit Center in July of 2021 after previously serving as the CEO of the United Way of Southeastern Idaho. He brings past experience in both the education and social impact sector for both internationally and domestically, having worked in both Uganda and Chile. Kevin has directed federal grant programs related to college access for first-generation students and also directed community programs supporting financial stability for families immigrating to the U.S. In his free time, he and his family love exploring the great beauty in the West by biking, hiking, and getting outside into nature. On Saturdays in the fall, you can find Kevin all avidly cheering on his Notre Dame Fighting Irish football team. Thank you for joining us, Kevin. I'm so excited to have you here today because I know you have a lot to share with people in the nonprofit sector and just anyone who's learning to and wanting to grow their leadership. And today I'm excited to introduce you and to have you share your story and give us some tips on the leadership competency, futuristic thinking. So, without any further ado, let's take a few minutes to have you introduce yourself and tell your story of how you wound up being the CEO of the Idaho Nonprofit Center and how those doors open for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Angie. It's really great to be able to chat all things nonprofits anytime. Always up for that. Yeah, my journey is it's kind of one of just saying yes to the right things at the right time and throwing myself in places where a lot of other people didn't want to go, to be frank. It really starts in my university days. I was at college at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And so just the high level overview is my journey took me from Indiana to Uganda, back to Richmond, Virginia, and then to Minneapolis, and then Chile, and then Omaha, and then Idaho. So it's been a really winding circular journey, but all things have led to the next thing. It really starts for me, my first taste of the nonprofit sector was when I was in college. I was actually traveling overseas to Uganda for the first time to do like a summer service project with my university. And just happen chance, I'm in the back of the airplane somewhere over the Sahara Desert and waiting in line for the bathroom with a Notre Dame sweatshirt on. This other guy who's, maybe 30 years older than me comes up to me and asks me if I was a student. I had the sweatshirt on, so I was identifying, I guess. And he said he was an alum from years back, and he was going over there for a different project. And he invited me to come up and see what they were doing. It was a startup nonprofit that was installing solar-powered computers and long-range Wi-Fi in sort of these refugee camps in the northern part of a war-torn part of the country. So I, of course, couldn't say no to checking out what was going on up there. We ended up staying in touch over the course of the next year. And I was able to make it back to Uganda one more time. And we stayed in touch. And I asked him, as I was getting ready to graduate college, could I work for you guys? Could I go over? I was looking for an international opportunity. Asked him if I could go work for him. He said, we don't have any money to pay anybody. We just bought all the equipment. We're a startup, but if you want to raise your own salary, you can do that. So I said, sure, let's try that out. I asked my parents for my Christmas card list. This was back in the late 2000s, I guess. So there was no like GoFundMe. Social media was barely a thing. I think the first iPhone came out that year. So I just did the old fashioned write a letter, put a picture on the front of what I was trying to do, and sent it out to 200 plus folks. Within just like 30 or 60 days, $20,000, then $30,000 of funds just rolled in. It was enough to instantly be able to say like, yes, let's do this. Let's figure it out. So I call it kind of my DIY Peace Corps experience.
Wow.
It was very informal, but it sort of set the tone for everything that I've done since. Being able to say yes to opportunities where I've just put myself in a position to go places that maybe people didn't think of going, and that led to the next thing. And so I had a brief career in teaching, both domestically in Richmond, Virginia, and I met my wife at a teaching program actually, and we went to teach in South America and Chile, and then we came back to the States when our oldest child was almost born, and landed in Omaha, Nebraska, where she's from, and sort of got back into nonprofits at that point. And again, like Idaho wasn't on my radar, but we wanted to move west, and the United Way job opened up. I was looking for kind of community level, 30,000 foot type organizations to jump into, and never been to Pocatello, never been to Idaho when I looked at the job, and was like, let's give this a shot, and things worked out. We loved it. Which then led here to the Idaho Nonprofit Center, where I'm currently CEO. Been in the role about a year now, and just really enjoying it, enjoying the variety of organizations that we get to work with. We have 800 plus members. We support them with capacity building, training, advocacy, any type of resource and need that they have. We're kind of the go-to organization for that. And, to be able to see the different types of nonprofits that help our communities thrive and help our state be successful, and we're a small part of that, which is a really fulfilling role to play.
Great. Wow. What a winding road that is. I mean, you've been all over the map on a few continents already,
I
and you're
think,
not that old. And
yeah, I think we're in Idaho for good. That's the one thing we do feel pretty strongly about. So we found our roots, place where we want to put down roots. We have three young kids now, three boys, all kind of starting their educational journeys in school now, and so it's a good place to be here in the Treasure
that's awesome. So, do you think you've discovered your purpose in the work you're doing now?
Valley. Yeah, to some degree, I always struggle with that question. To be honest, this idea of like a mantra or a personal mission statement. I sometimes I can hold on to some of those things for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and then I feel like the environment changes, the needs change. I need to refocus on something else, whether it's personal or family or professional. Um, as I was thinking about that question, I kind of landed on, if I can leave a legacy and leave things in a better place than when I found them. I love building things
Mhm.
in the sense of organizations. I love a challenge, an organization that has potential, that needs maybe an infusion of energy and resources and ideas, and the ability to build that. That's really fulfilling for me. And so I think that's really at the heart of what I love doing. And if it can serve the sector, the nonprofit sector, or the community at large, that's in alignment with my values and my mission too. But I don't have one particular slogan that I just kind of attach myself to. But I wish I could stick to one. But that's kind of the way I approach it.
I think our purpose is always kind of moving. It's a moving target, different
It is.
specific needs. Um, but I know that when I met you, the reason I had you on the podcast today is because I know how how big of a heart you have for the nonprofit sector and also just for serving, serving others, and just hearing your story and understanding who you are as a human being, and what an amazing leader you are, and how you're able to bring people together to do amazing things. I got to be work with you a little bit at United Way and be on the
Mhm.
board, and we've just continued this friendship, and I've just loved seeing your success and seeing you thrive and helping nonprofits with tools to be successful. And that's basically the reason we have this podcast too, is for people who want to learn on their own. Uh, they want to continue their personal and professional development, and it doesn't cost any money to listen to a free podcast. So, trying to gather leaders to talk about leadership competencies that are important, and there's 25 of them what we focus on. And today, our focus is the futuristic thinking. And so, I thought it would be great to talk to you today about the future of nonprofits and how you see the future of for nonprofits and how leaders in the nonprofit industry can start thinking futuristically and really prepare themselves for things to come that they might be able to anticipate, and also for things that we may not be able to anticipate, like pandemics and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. It's a big question. So as I jump into it, feel free to steer me in particular directions. But yeah, I think what I've learned is as we think about the future of nonprofits, I think a lot of it has to do with I guess two things. I think the sort of way that we frame our missions around causes. We know from research that really causes are the driver of a lot of fundraising success. We need to be thinking more in terms of how do we frame our mission as a cause that the community can respond positively to. That's a big part of certainly our advocacy work and work with other nonprofits to help that messaging come through, which that entails, investments in communications and marketing and some of those things that nonprofits traditionally have avoided investing in because they've been so program focused. And so let's get the boxes of food or the services out the door. But the messaging is really just as important because it's part of a story that educates the community on a change that we desire, right? If we're trying to solve for these really hard, intractable problems like the housing crisis, like food insecurity, access to healthcare. I mean, all of these are causes, right? And no one single organization is going to solve that problem on their own. They may have fantastic world-class services, but they can't meet the whole need. And they also sometimes can't on their own change whole systems, which are heavily entrenched. But we do see through advocacy and through the support of the public at large, that identification of, yes, there's a reckoning to be had here around this issue. Let's address it as a society. That's when we start to see big things, those big boulders get moved. And so I think nonprofits need to be thinking more about how they reframe and reposition, how they fit in with their missions to that larger cause that they're a part of overall in the kind of those societal shifts. Now, the second thing I think is around just leadership and nonprofits and the importance of good executive leadership in nonprofits. Almost without fail, a successful nonprofit has a high functioning leader in the executive role. It's very rare to find the opposite to be true, and those two things are so highly correlated. Obviously, the board is an important resource there too, and that partnership that exists between an executive director and a board as their direct advocates, as their frankly their direct supervisor is important and crucial as well. But really supporting our leaders is top of mind for me in this role too, as we think about the future of nonprofits. How do we support effective leadership? How do we support leadership growth, building the pipeline of leaders? When we think about our state, I don't even think in higher ed right now we have like a master of nonprofit administration, right? We have some certificate programs. We have, we need to be thinking big about, we're the fifth largest employment sector nonprofits are, and how do we support really strong leaders that are coming up through the ranks? We're attracting, leaders that come from out of state, like I did, who want to stay here and grow and build their organizations. And so that's top of mind as well. And I think those two elements are really key.
Oh yeah, those are really great things to be thinking about. As it relates to the boards or your board or some of the boards that you've worked with, how do you keep them thinking futuristically as it relates to where you are now and where you want to get going and that vision that you have?
Yeah, I think, we nonprofits tend to struggle when boards get into sort of the day-to-day operations and management aspect. Given a certain size nonprofit that actually has staff, it looks a little different for an all volunteer organization because the board does have to do some day-to-day operational tasks. But for a medium-sized nonprofit or a nonprofit with at least a handful of staff, the board is really there to be a part of generative strategic discussions. And certainly it's, I think, a challenge for nonprofit leaders to keep boards engaged, to keep them up to date in terms of building the knowledge base that you need to have productive, generative, strategic, futuristic discussions. And that's honestly like one of the most challenging parts of our jobs in this sector, I think, is how do we leverage that talent asset that the board is to tap into that insight that they have about their community and really lead to strategic thought. And we've had some great discussions here at the Idaho Nonprofit Center. I think we're lucky to have a board made up of slightly over half includes nonprofit professionals and executives from around the state. And then the other half made up of community members from various backgrounds, from the corporate world to higher ed, government, et cetera. But that's an ongoing challenge, I think, for nonprofit leaders. One of the hardest parts of the job, for sure, is how do I manage my board in both directions, right? Manage upward, and how do they manage me, and how do we keep a productive, strategic focus on what we're doing as an organization? Because ultimately, they're your 12 to 20 or however many board members you have, your first line advocates in the community for your organization.
Yeah. So impactful to set aside some time, because that's the one thing that everybody's fighting for is time. But it has to be intentional to set some time aside to pause and get off the hamster wheel, and sometimes just think about strategy and future and even if you're creating a story or some scenarios on the best case scenario, what could we be? What are some opportunities, and what are really getting collaboration from the whole group about best case scenarios and getting all those perspectives in one room. Like you said, they come from all sectors and industries. So setting the time, you won't get that information out from those people if we don't put time and intention into it. And
Yeah,
that's
and I
the
think
one. Yeah.
the leaders also, it's not just the board, but us as leaders, we need to build time into our own schedules to be having that sort of personal reflection, strategic thinking time, which I think that's been a learning for me too, is that as much as everything feels like it's go go go, respond to the next crisis, respond to the needs even of your own team, and you start to wear yourself a little bit thin. You need to build time that's protected in your own schedule to have those forward future thinking idea generation sessions, even if it's just with yourself, to think through, okay, where are we going, how's it going, how can I be thoughtful about what the future holds for our organization, rather than just being in the moment constantly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, coupled with COVID, is just that people have been kind of in a burnout. They've reached burnout, is because people mostly are altruistic and selfless. That when we work with these organizations, many of them, they really just they want to serve, and the opposite is true in some instances. But in nonprofits, most of these people are there because it fulfills their why, and they're the people that need the self check, and we have to protect them and help teach them how to protect themselves and be intentional with our time and say, look, sometimes you're going to have to be told, like, you need to take some time to reflect. You need to uh, take a little time for yourself and make sure you're seeing your family, getting a little bit of life balance and things, so that they're not burning out. Because when you're in the trenches with the people that you're serving, oftentimes it can be, if you're not putting yourself first and your natural instinct is to be very selfless and altruistic, it's great because it fills your purpose and your soul. However, if your cup isn't full, then oftentimes you burn out.
Yeah, and just knowing when you need to zoom out to get your head out of the details and out of the sort of chaos that exists at the ground floor. Just this week, I was kind of overwhelmed by a number of grants that we were working on, and you start projecting your own fears and your own insecurities about what the future holds for, especially when it relates to funding. There's always stress around that with
Hmm.
nonprofits. And then you step away from your inbox, step away from your OneDrive folder, and zoom out a little bit and realize, yeah, you've got the organization on great footing. You're headed in the right direction. This opportunity for a particular funding opportunity doesn't make or break the organization. It's things are still fine. You zoom out. You have that time just to take care of your perspective and your mental health to some degree. I think is key, but we don't often do that enough, I think.
Yeah, understanding your emotions and where you are, and you mentioned earlier being in fight or flight, and I think sometimes we get on that treadmill of life and just we just start reacting and responding to every stimuli in our environment and not carving out time or being intentional on our calendar. Like, quarterly, I'm going to reflect on how the last quarters went. Put it in your calendar. Or this next meeting, we're going to take an hour and a half to throw the biggest audacious plans, your pipe dreams, up on the wall of, and let's just get creative and brainstorm. You have to be intentional about it, because otherwise you're just handling business as it happens and putting out fires, which none of us
Yeah.
are really firemen, but we're really just doing mundane tasks that we think are super important, because when we get into, they're important, but when we get into fight or flight, we're just responding instead of being intentional. All of
Yeah.
the work is important, but we're not literally putting out fires. We're,
Yeah.
an event doesn't have everybody there that we intended, or, it's not as big of a deal that we sometimes make it, or our ego tries to make it, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. One strategy that's helped me is even just to get rid of the to-do list and say, what are one or two things that define success for today?
Mhm.
And they could be like big or small things. Maybe it's an outcome from an important meeting. Maybe it's finishing a big grant, but maybe whatever it is that has to happen today for today to be successful. If you add that up, you have like 250 work days in a year. That's a lot of progress made, versus just kind of like approaching the day of like whatever hits me is going to hit me, and I'm going to just be the punching bag that responds in real time. It doesn't work very well that way, and sometimes that means letting go of a few other things that we used to worry a lot about. But I think defining those, what makes today successful, what one or two things would be a positive outcome, is about all we as humans and leaders sometimes can do in a busy day that involves so many other moving parts.
Yeah, and that keeps you focused on your values, really. Like, really coming back to your values and the mission of the organization. I mean, we can talk about our mission and our vision, but if we're not living it out or modeling it, it's really hard. If we're, ugly at work and we're not serving our people at work, then it's not really helpful to serve our communities in such a great way if we're not starting with our own families, with our own people in our organizations. But we're not going to be able to do it if we don't protect our time. How do you think you can cultivate this skill in our families and in our communities as well? As far as you mentioned storytelling, maybe that's a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, so one book I read, see if I can pull it up to the camera here, for those that are viewing, it's called The Practice of Groundedness by Brad Stulberg. And it's kind of six key principles to achieve some of that groundedness. And two that really resonate with me, I think, are building deep community, and then secondly, incorporating movement. And movement, for those who are physically able, could be as simple as like going for a walk at certain key times around the day to rejuvenate, to recharge, understanding how your energy levels fluctuate throughout the day, paying more attention to that, especially as we get older. We can't do everything that we used to be able to do. I mean, for me personally, the outlet that I love the most, and I try to do it one or two times during the week, and then definitely on the weekends, is like hiking or mountain biking in our beautiful trails, in any part of the state that I happen to be in, but especially here in the Treasure Valley. But and then that building deep community, it's who are your people who maybe don't care anything about what you do professionally, but it's your family, obviously, your close friends who you grab a beer with, who you grab coffee with, who you catch up with, and who understand you as a person, not as a professional with a title, and are there for you. And I think those are two practices that are, I think, really important to me. And
That's great.
our family's relatively good at doing that with regularity. I think my wife Becca keeps me pretty accountable too. She's great at building community, and a lot of times I get my cup filled just by tagging along, which is easy for me.
Yeah, she's great. And your kids are now at an age where they can probably hike a little bit out in the foothills and things. So all of them.
Yeah, yeah, they're getting there. I tried to take the oldest, on a Father's Day hike earlier this year, and one of them fell down and skinned their knee off a rock like 20 minutes in, and then the rest was a total disaster. So, that's what I get for trying to drag them up to the National Forest area on Father's Day.
It'll be memorable for sure.
Exactly. The hard times are the frustrating times of parenting are the most memorable. So
Yeah. So do you feel like after COVID now you're probably on a place where it's time to take a deep breath and really focus on the future? Is that kind of where you are and the state is?
yeah, I think just the sector at large, nonprofits right now are in that mode of asking what's next. We have some really big challenges that we're facing as a sector. I think we're facing potentially a recession, which is a scary word for fundraisers and executive directors. There's some debate about whether we're currently in a recession, and how donors and corporate donors and foundations even might respond. I mean, we still know that individual donors are the largest segment of charitable giving. Foundations are usually second, and then corporate partners, of course. So there's a lot of questions around that. I think people are a little bit nervous about that, with some funding cliffs potentially coming. But I think we're optimistic. We have the right skill set as a sector. We're continuing to build that skill set. But I think organizations individually too are asking us questions of how do we respond to these great challenges that we have in our communities right now, especially around housing access to and conservation of our great open spaces, sharing resources equitably with those who are being left behind in the housing market, are food insecure, or being left behind educationally. That's obviously a huge issue for our state with some educational outcomes. So some big challenges. And I think we need, it's going to be the leaders that step up and can create valuable collaborations that align across government, for-profit, nonprofit. That's where the magic is. It's not just nonprofits that can do it on their own. Nonprofits have been asked to do a lot in the state, but it's time for a lot more alignment with those sectors. That's the only way we get some of these big problems attacked and solved.
Yeah, that's some great points. So would you be willing to share like three pieces of advice or lessons or words of wisdom, anything that you feel that you wish you had known earlier?
Yeah, let's see. So the first thing I think is just around risk taking. I'm not necessarily the most. I'm probably in my day-to-day life a little bit risk averse, but when it's come to the big decisions, like jumping into an opportunity that launched my nonprofit career in Uganda when nobody else wanted that job, risk taking has really, or at least being the person willing to show up in the room has gotten me pretty far. That's sometimes it's just showing those who show up get assigned, and then one thing leads to the next. So that's always been part of it. Just take those risks, be willing to fail. I don't think we let ourselves fail as much as we should. I certainly don't. But take those risks, be willing to show up, and see what happens. Again, going where others haven't gone before and be willing to step into those spaces is key too. And I think sort of the last thing is just sort of know your superpower, know what makes you unique as a leader, as an employee, as a contributor, whatever it is that your role is, as a board member, as a community member, a donor, whatever it is your role is. Understand what you bring to the table that's unique. What is that perspective? What is the value that you bring, and really lean on that, leverage that. I think, can't remember where I read it, but you get a lot more out of leaning on your strengths and really driving those forward and going far with those. You want to be aware of your weaknesses, but and work on them certainly, but don't spend your whole day trying to get better at something that's just not natural for you.
hmm Those are great tips and words of wisdom. I wish that's one of the things that I love is that getting all this wisdom. So many things I wish I had known earlier in life that things could have been so much easier, but we probably wouldn't have listened anyways.
Yeah, and it's a constant battle of, like, you forget your North Star. You go 2 weeks and you're on fire, and then you hit a lull, and you got to find a way to get back, and you got to find a way to rediscover what it is that makes you tick and what it is that you're after. I find it to be just like a constant iterative process in both personal and professional life of, like, it's always a moving target. The human nature is that it's hard to keep your finger right on the thing that drives you, that you need to always be doing. But that's why it's so important to step back and, like, get out of it and figure out how to get back on track and recenter and do the things that keep us going.
Yeah, and I think one of those things that brings you back to where you need to be, your North Star, is those values. Understanding
Mhm.
what your values are and what the organization you're working for values. And oftentimes when we work with organizations, you would be surprised at how many people don't know what their own values are. And
Mhm.
I think it is important that we take time to help people understand what values are, what they mean, and how you tie everything back to that. And when you're feeling yucky, or you don't like how something goes, most times it has to do with you didn't align with your own values, or this organization isn't aligning with your values, or something's amiss and we feel uncomfortable. We don't know why or how to communicate it, don't have the language. And so when people just even having simple activities in the workplace to help people uh, figure out what their values are, because those do change over time, and I believe our purpose changes over time in different transitions of life. My purpose and my values were a lot different at 20 than they are at 50 or 49. I won't put myself there
Yeah.
yet, but it changes. But wherever you are and wherever they are, being able to meet them where they are, you meet yourself where you are, and I think that's a skill that we really have to develop in people, to help them be most successful, because they can't really futuristic think or be creative when they're in that fight or flight mode and they're in busy work constantly and never feeling like they're really reflective, taking time to reflect, taking
Yeah.
time to figure out,
Yeah.
oh, I guess I do really value integrity over, you know, whatever the other value is, like whatever, kind of figuring yourself out, then understanding what the people on your team value.
Mhm.
You may value um, something's completely different than your teammates, but where do you align? Finding that alignment and how you all align separately with the organization's goals, like that is a game changer for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, when I first started here at the Idaho Nonprofit Center, we probably 3 or 4 months in, we renewed our strategic plan and went through a process for that. And it started with value identification, which I think was super helpful. We still go back as the staff to look through that lens to make sure that the decisions we're making, the directions we're going, align with those values. But also just it's given us a North Star as an organization to constantly go back to it at least quarterly to say, where are we pivoting? What are we doing differently? How are we meeting what we said was important? Is our North Star still our North Star rather than, just a document that sits on the shelf? It's been a real living iterative document. And that's made a big difference, I think. And that's part of that futuristic thinking skill set. It's make time, build in time to go back to evaluate what it is that you put on paper and where you're heading and pivot where you need to and adjust. But it's just a constant process. It's that constant iterative building process.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that looking at where you've come as an organization, like reverse engineering it and thinking the things that you've been through, the things that you've overcome, the changes that have had to happen, can actually show you how much resilience and how flexible the organization actually is, so that you can start to think about, if we could do this in the past, what are our possibilities? What are the opportunities for us in the future? And thinking big, like I said, pipe dreams. Just thinking
Yeah.
big, because when you shoot
Hmm.
low, you hit the target every time. But if you aim high,
Hmm.
you know, you're always going to aim higher and land
Yeah, yeah.
higher.
And we certain our communities and our state need big ideas to be successful. We're seeing some great examples of that in the nonprofit sector, especially through COVID and coming out of it. Some big, awesome projects happening in the sector, but we need to keep thinking big. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I interviewed someone in the nonprofit sector today, Vanessa Moos she's on your board,
Yeah. Yes.
and she talked about that as well. And it's just amazing how people were able to pull off fundraising events virtually and make the same amount of money fundraising in a virtual event that would have been held at like the Coeur d'Alene Resort before and still bring in that same kind of money.
Mhm.
And that's invigorating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've got a great project going on to build a new facility to serve their community where one didn't exist before. And so yeah, it's a great partnership collaboration that they've got going up in Kootenai County, up in up in north part of Idaho, and yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kevin. I just really appreciate the work you do for our state and for the leadership and just for, the human that you are and the friend that you've become over these past few years, getting to know you after meeting you in Leadership Pocatello. Uh,
That's right.
I think
Yeah.
it's an awesome partnership, and I just really appreciate your time to serve, and thanks. Keep doing what you're doing.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Huge shout out to our sponsors of the Leader U podcast. Today's sponsors are Radon Professionals. Radon Professionals was established in 2003 in Pocatello, Idaho. Tiffany and Allie took over the company in 2016 and have been rocking the radon game ever since. Radon Professionals specializes in radon testing and the design and installation of radon mitigation systems across Idaho and Wyoming. What is radon gas? Radon gas is an odorless, colorless, tasteless, radioactive gas that comes from the natural breakdown of uranium found in most rocks and soils. Radon finds its way into homes or buildings, and according to the EPA, radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer. The only way to know if a home or building has elevated radon levels is to test it. Whether in its existing home, an office, or new construction project, they have you covered. The name says it all. They are Radon Professionals. When it comes to quality and professionalism, they've set a new standard. It's not good until it's great. They're nationally certified by the AARST and the NRPP. They guarantee their work and warranty their installations. Guaranteed results with every install. Radon Professionals. Call or text 208-317-3603. Or on the web, you can find them at www.radon-professionals.com, or check out their Google reviews to see the awesome things their customers have to say. Thank you to the Radon Professionals for sponsoring the Leader U podcast.